I love BioShock. BioShock 1 to be specific, since I've barely played any of the other ones. Here's a quick rundown of BioShock. You run around and run down an underwater city based off some philosophical ideals I'm too dumb to understand, shooting things with your gun and using gene magic called plasmids you get from a genetic currency called Atom that runs in a juice called Eve. There's Big Daddies, Little Sisters, and Big Trouble in Little China. It's a first-person shooter, but it had a sense of originality that really made it stand out. And this was probably the driving purpose as to why BioShock was made in the first place. Back in E3 2006, creative director of BioShock, Ken Levine, had this to say about the goals of the project.
What we're trying to do is to redefine what it means to be a first-person shooter. Our goal is to put a stake in the heart of all those cliches you've been playing for years in first-person shooters. The linear corridors, the very static environments, and the cookie-cutter AIs. Now, we understand that's a pretty lofty goal, and it's really going to be up to you guys to decide whether we succeed.
And succeed they did. It was dark and foreboding, but pulled you into the world regardless. Exploring Rapture was an amazing trip, only complemented by the stellar gameplay. Overall, I left the game feeling more than satisfied. You know what else I love? RPGs. Traditional turn-based combat ones or action sandbox ones. I'm just really fond of the genre. Throw in some tactics too and that's my shit right there. So then I thought about it. Was the reason I liked BioShock so much because it was an RPG? I actually see this question asked a decent amount. In trying to redefine the FPS genre, did it end up becoming an entirely different one? So, the question on the table, is BioShock an RPG? To answer that question, we have to first define what an RPG, or role-playing game for the uninitiated, is. By the way, take a shot whenever I say RPG in this video. You'll fucking die. If I were to ask you to describe a platformer, you'd probably say something like, you jump onto platforms and usually move towards the right of the screen. If I asked you the same thing but with an FPS, you'd probably say you're in first person and you shoot things. But with RPGs, it's much more than, oh, you play a role in the game. Because if that were true, fucking every game would be an RPG! So if it's not about playing a role, then what is it about? Well, I've managed to come up with 3 tenets I believe make up RPGs, which I'm not gonna say out loud because I trust you can read. One of the most important things about RPGs is stat progression. For anyone who's played an RPG, especially traditional JRPGs, I'm sure a key part of your experience was making the numbers go up. Usually this is done through experience points and leveling up to increase certain attributes or get new skills. Or it can be done in something like Pokemon where your monsters literally evolve when it's strong enough. And this is important because getting better and higher numbers is ultimately how a player wins an RPG, and not necessarily through mastery of the game's mechanics. Everything works towards making your character an overpowered badass by the end of the game, capable of conquering whatever feat is put in front of them. RPGs are about the growth of the player character rather than the player themselves. Sure, better knowledge of tactics in the game systems will definitely help you get better at the game, but weaker units with weaker stats will almost never beat a high-level endgame boss, regardless of your skill. And games recognize this. In The Witcher 3, quest an enemy is way out of your league at your current level or marked with skulls to tell you, yeah, you're not gonna win this. Compare this with platformers like Donkey Kong Country or Super Meat Boy. These games are known for their skill-based gameplay because it's you, the player, who's getting better at handling Meat Boy. Or whatever character you're playing, whatever. Yeah, platformers can have upgrades that make play easier like Mega Man or the recently released Cuphead, but they're never the focus and the base moveset should be enough to get through the game. Even if it's hard as fucky, come on man! Next up is player choice. This is kind of a vague one, so I'm gonna break it down into 3 subcategories to help explain what I mean. Wow, one of 3 categories has 3 more subcategories in it? Almost like RPGs are complicated. Okay, so the first way to add player choice in your game is to add character creation. This classical D&D style customization is pretty common in RPGs like Skyrim and... Alright, look, I know the trend of writing Skyrim's dick is pretty overdone and I don't want to do that here. But it's hard to talk about a game giving the player freedom in character creation and, role-playing without mentioning Bethesda games. I know other games do this like the Souls series, but the amount of control you have over who you want your character to be is greater than almost any other RPG I've seen, and is a pretty good representation of this point. Another way to give players choices is to literally give them direct choices to actions through things like dialogue trees or actual on-screen prompts. These choices usually end up either affecting the story, character interactions and relationships, or even the player character themselves. Games like Mass Effect and Undertale are probably some of the best examples of this, where the decisions you make can have a vastly different outcome on the game as a whole. To contrast this, the last and a more subtle way is in being able to craft how you want to play the game. I just talked about RPGs being about giving players higher stats, and the player choice comes from the ability to manipulate those stats. This can be done in a number of ways. The player can choose what particular areas they want to specialize in skill trees, what armor or equipment they want for the best stats, or what classes they want for an ideal party comp. Part of getting a roleplay in a game is feeling like you have input over how you want to be presented in the game. You don't get any of that choice in fucking Sonic. Wait, you do? What the fuck? Lastly is an emphasis on story. Usually there's the trademark long, sprawling story you see in games like The Witcher 3 with its ever-changing political drama and, hell, any of the Final Fantasies with its... The story doesn't necessarily need to be as complex as some of these, but they're usually objective or quest-based, with the focus of these tasks being ultimately to make your character stronger by the end. Pokemon, for example, is a pretty simple story, until it didn't, but it still focuses on 8 gym leaders you have to beat, each escalating in difficulty with several random fetch quests and dungeons in between in order to become the Pokemon League champion. RPGs also have a big focus on telling the story through dialogue. Lots of dialogue. Look how much dialogue there is! Let me take 2 games from the same franchise but different genres. Super Mario World and Super Mario RPG. One of these is a platformer and the other is an RPG. I wonder which is which. Both are Mario games, but one story is about going to different lands to get stars for a giant sword with friends and foes alike. Each of these characters having distinct personalities and arcs. The other's about jumping shit. Just inherently, the story of the RPG has to grow and evolve in order to reflect the characters and gameplay doing the same. Okay, finally, back to BioShock. After covering all that, how does BioShock relate to what I just talked about? Well, let's just go down the list again and see if BioShock meets the criteria I've just laid out. Alright, so stat progression. There are several weapon upgrade stations where you can improve your different guns. You can also spend Atom to get more health, more Eve, and upgrade the strength of your plasmids and tonics. In terms of player choice, you have the direct option to save or harvest the Little Sisters. Harvesting them gives you more immediate Atom, but saving them will give you more Atom in the long run, as well as making you not feel like a dick for, you know, not killing a child! There are also tons of different plasmids, but you can only have so many equipped at a time. Going back to the upgrade system, you won't have enough Atom to completely upgrade everything, so you have to pick what you value most as a player. A similar thing is done with a gun since you get limited money to spend on ammunition, meaning you'll have to choose a few weapons you really invest in. Because the game so heavily reinforces specialization, you end up kind of building your own versions of traditional RPG classes. You want to play a traditional fighter? Focus on health, defense tonic, and gun upgrades. Want to play a magic user? Buy more plasmid slots and upgrade offensive abilities like Electro Bolt and Incinerate. Want to play a rogue? Get movement tonics coupled with camouflage and sneak attack ones. Want to play a support role? Get skills that focus on hacking and indirect combat like Hypnotize Big Daddy. But because the game simply gives you all the tools you need to build your own class, rather than locking you into one specific playstyle, means that you can mix and match however you want. Skyrim, gets praised for this a lot. The class you choose affects how certain skills grow, but doesn't stop you from playing different ways. If that's not player choice, then I don't know what the fuck is. And for story, BioShock has a long narrative that's got plenty of characters, is very lore-driven, and has an incredible plot twist about player choice. Hey, would you look at that? Which I'm not going to talk about here for fear of spoilers, but I will in the future. Just trust me, it's cool. Okay, with all that said, it seems like BioShock's an RPG, right? Well, no. Not in the traditional sense anyway. Here's when we get into what's really weird about RPGs as a genre. RPGs are very flexible, meaning RPG elements can be mashed pretty easily into tons of other genres, and done so pretty discreetly. BioShock is not an RPG because what makes an RPG can be put into other games without making them RPGs. However, it still has the components of one. Senior producer at BioWare, Fernando Mello, said in an interview, "We have data that shows there are a lot of people that enjoy playing RPGs, although they won't necessarily call them RPGs. They'll play Fallout, Assassin's Creed, and even Call of Duty, which have these progression elements. You're putting points into things. But they don't necessarily associate that as an RPG. Going off of that, we don't classify Call of Duty as an RPG, even though it has a ranking system. We don't call Telltale games RPGs, even though the bulk of the gameplay is making decisions that, as each game likes to remind you, make the story tailored by how you play. And guys, The Legend of Zelda is not an RPG. Stop fucking putting it on top RPGs of all time lists. Fucking Game Informer, GameSpot. It's an action-adventure game, which is another oddly broad genre I might talk about too someday. Maybe, I don't know. The distinction here all comes down to focus. Games can have these elements, but unless they're the absolute focus of the game, or what the developer wants to get across to the player, then it's not an RPG. And it's not the focus of BioShock either. Sure, they're there, but they play sort of a supporting role in comparison to the main character, the FPS. One reason I think BioShock gets this question asked so much is that it comes much closer to towing the line of us realizing that a game has RPG elements than some other RPG derivatives do. So I guess what I'm trying to say with all this is that, 1, BioShock is not an RPG, but an FPS with underlying RPG mechanics. 2, RPGs are a weird and complicated genre. And 3, Zelda's not a fucking RPG!